That's one small step for man.
I have a dream.
We fight for peace. Welcome to American Snapshots. I'm Kate Kelly from America Comes Alive, and I'm going to tell you the story about a couple of kids who traveled all over the United States all by themselves in the early 1900s. I first came upon the story of the Abernathy kids in a history newsletter from my hometown. The newsletter featured a photograph of the two kids sitting in a car, and they couldn't have been more than 9 and 13. The date of the photograph was about 1910, and it was captioned, "Traveling to the West Alone." Well, that's very interesting. Forget the fact that they weren't old enough for a driver's license. Where were their parents? I thought this was something worth investigating, and indeed, it proved to be quite an interesting story. The boys, named Bud and Temple, were two of Jack Abernathy's kids. Jack was the first Marshal of Oklahoma Territory, and his wife had died in childbirth, and so he was left to raise 6 children all by himself. Now, as I'll explain later, Jack was quite the courageous man, and he raised children of the same ilk, but we'll get to him later. The kids, in the meantime, were happy to dream up things to do without a mother around, and it started when they were in grade school. They would spend their afternoons after school going over maps and making plans, and one day their father came home. This was 1908, and the kids were 9 and 5. And one day their dad came home from work, and they said they had a plan. They knew how they wanted to spend their summer vacation. So he heard them out. He saw what they had planned as far as the route on the map, and what they wanted to do was make a trip he had made many times from the Oklahoma ranch to visit his friend in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The friend had just become governor of New Mexico, so this was a good time to go and visit him. He listened to the kids for a little bit, and he said, "Okay, give me the night to think about it." So the kids were very nervous all night long, wondering what their father would decide. And the next morning, they got up, and their dad said, "Yes." He said, "With one provision. I want you to take my horse, Sam Bass. Bud should ride him because he's a good, steady steed, and I'll feel comfortable knowing he's with you." So Temple was going to ride Geronimo, his pony, and Bud would be on the larger horse that his dad felt comfortable with. Now, Jack took good care of them. He set up an emergency bank account that they could have access to money if anything came up, and he handed them a copy of the New Testament, and he said, "Say your prayers every night." The kids headed off. They made their trip down to New Mexico. They were welcomed at the executive mansion. The governor made sure that they had a few good meals and a couple of good nights' sleep before they turned around, and all was well. They got back to Oklahoma and were ready to plan more adventures, which they did. Now, we're going to fast forward to 1912. Turned out one of their other good family friends was Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt it was outgoing president by this stage, and so he said to them, "I'm going to Africa, and I'm going to be bringing back specimens for the Museum of Natural History. Why don't you meet the ship as it docks in New York City?" Well, this sounded great to the Abernathys. Jack didn't have much time, so he was going to take a train to get to New York City. And the kids figured, hey, they got the summer, they'll do the horseback ride thing. Now, by this time, they were famous. The newspapers came out to meet them, communities welcomed them, fed them, all sorts of things. So it was quite an event when they traveled. They made their leisurely trip, arrived in New York City, met up with Teddy Roosevelt, and a great reunion was enjoyed by all. Now, Jack thought, all right, we're in New York City. We might as well stay around and do some sightseeing. And so the kids thought that was fine, but what really caught their interest were the automobiles. Now, traffic at this point was mainly horse and wagon or horse and buggy, but there were a few automobiles cruising around on the streets, and the kids thought that looked like a really fun way to travel. So they went back to their dad and said, "Let's drive back to Oklahoma." Jack, being Jack, said, "All right, look around, see if you can find a car that you could maneuver and drive, come back and talk to me." So they found something called a brush runabout that was a good size for them to handle, light, small, and they would be able to navigate with that. They went back to their dad. He took his wallet and they went back and bought the brush runabout. For himself, he bought a larger luxury car that he would be able to put other family members in when they got back to Oklahoma. They then went to the railroad and dropped the horses off so they would get taken back by railroad to Oklahoma, and they set off to drive their way home. Now, the kids just made adventure after adventure, and their last adventure was a motorcycle trip all the way across the country. And after that, at this point, the kids were, I guess it was, Temple was probably 13, so they were getting older, and Jack just decided, wow, it's time for them to settle down and go to school. So they did. Bud eventually studied law and became a district attorney, and Temple finished school and went into the gas and oil business with his dad. But in the meantime, they had acquired a lifetime full of memories in a very short period of time. Now, I do have to tell you the story about Jack briefly. Jack turned out, he had created a reputation for himself he was called Catch 'em Alive Jack, even before he had children. His business was catching wolves alive and selling these animals to circuses and menageries. Now, he had a method that you might be surprised to hear, and that was that he had a really fast horse, probably Sam Bass, that could run alongside a wolf pack, and when Jack had spotted the wolf that he wanted to catch and felt like the timing was right, Jack would leap from the horse, landing with a thud next to the wolf, and the wolf would turn and snarl or growl at whatever was jumping beside them. And at that point, Jack would sock him in the mouth in such a way that the wolf would be stunned and knocked out. During that time, the people who were with him could quickly tie up the legs of the wolf, and they'd load him on the back of one of the horses and take him back and sell him. So Jack was quite a guy and well known even before then. Both of those stories are on my website, Catch 'em Alive Jack, and the children's whom Teddy Roosevelt admired. So check out America Comes Alive and read the complete stories there. Thank you.
That's one small step for